The rain in the city of Oakhaven didn't just fall. It hissed against the pavement, a cold, relentless static that drowned out the heartbeat of the millions scurrying for cover. In a small, dimly lit corner of a 24-hour laundromat, Elena Vance sat on a plastic orange chair, the rhythmic thumping of a dryer the only thing keeping her grounded. For 10 years this had been her life. The mundane, the quiet, the utterly invisible. She wore a faded, oversized hoodie and worn-out jeans, her hair tucked into a messy bun. To the sleepy attendant behind the counter, she was just another night shift worker killing time. She never drew attention. She never looked anyone in the eye for too long. She lived by a singular, ironclad rule: be nothing. But tonight the air changed. The humidity didn't just rise, it curdled. A sudden, oppressive stillness slammed into the room, as if the city itself had held its breath. Elena felt the fine hairs on her arms stand up, not from the cold, but from a predatory resonance vibrating in the very marrow of her bones. The automatic glass doors of the laundromat slid open with a screech that sounded like a dying bird. He didn't walk in, he invaded the space. He was draped in a coat of midnight wool, his presence so vast and ancient that the flickering fluorescent lights overhead hummed in protest. This was Kalen Valerius, the vampire king of the Eastern Spire. He was a creature of myth made of shadow and bone-chilling elegance, a ruler whose name was used to quiet unruly children and terrify grown men. Elena kept her head down, her heart hammering a frantic, non-human rhythm against her ribs. Don't look up. Don't breathe. Just be a human girl waiting for her socks. But Kalen didn't head for the vending machines or the exit. He stopped. The scent of him, clove, blood orange and old earth, enveloped her. Elena felt a pull, a tether of white-hot lightning snapping into place between her chest and his. It was a call she had spent a decade deafening herself to. Slowly, as if pulled by an invisible wire, she looked up. His eyes weren't the dull brown of a human. They were swirling vortices of crimson and gold. He stared at her, his nostrils flaring, his expression shifting from regal indifference to a shock so profound it bordered on agony. 10 years, Kalen whispered, his voice a low, melodic tremor that shook the glass panes of the dryers. 10 years I have searched the shadows, only to find you hiding in the light. Before Elena could bolt, before she could unleash the strength that would expose her lie, Kalen moved with a speed that defied physics. He was in her space, his hand catching her jaw, his thumb dragging across the pulse point of her neck. With a low, possessive growl, he leaned down. His fangs didn't pierce her to kill. They grazed her skin in a jagged, searing brand mark. The mate bond flared into a blinding violet light that shattered the light bulbs above them, plunging the room into darkness. Elena gasped, her secret screaming to be released. She wasn't a human. She was the one thing a vampire king was never supposed to find. Hello to my incredible viewers tuning in from all over. Whether you're watching from the misty highlands, the bright city lights, or the quiet of your own home, I am so happy you're here for this supernatural journey. How are you all doing today? I hope your week is going beautifully. Have you hit that subscribe button yet? If not, please join our storytelling family right now. It helps the channel more than you know, and I'd love to have you along for every twist and turn. Kalen pulled back, his breath ragged, his eyes locked onto the glowing violet mark on her neck. You are mine, he vowed, the ancient power in his voice pinning her to the chair. And I will tear this city apart to find out why you smell of lilies and starlight, and why you have been pretending to be a ghost. Elena's blood ran cold. The mark was an anchor. Her human life was dead. And if the king realized she wasn't just a girl but a lunar sentinel, the natural-born executioners of his kind, the war that had been sleeping for a century was about to wake up. The neon sign of the laundromat flickered, casting rhythmic, skeletal shadows across the linoleum floor. In the sudden, suffocating darkness following the shattering of the bulbs, Elena felt the ancient weight of the mark on her collarbone. It burned like cold starlight, a brand that linked her soul to the monster standing over her. Elena Vance had spent a decade perfecting the art of being nothing. She was a botanical archivist by day, a woman who spoke to plants because they didn't ask questions. Her deepest desire was simple: peace. She wanted to live a life where she didn't have to check the moon's phase before leaving the house, a life where her skin didn't hum with a lethal energy whenever a predator drew near. She was a lunar sentinel, a rare breed of guardian whose blood was poisoned to vampires and whose silver-tinged strength could cleave a mountain. But 10 years ago, after the Great Purge destroyed her coven, she had buried her weapons and her heritage, choosing the boring safety of humanity over the glory of a lost war. "Look at me," Kaelin commanded, his voice a silken velvet that wrapped around her throat. Elena stood, her legs trembling, not from fear but from the sheer effort of suppressing the silver fire in her veins. If she fought him, she would reveal her nature. If she submitted, she was his property. "I'm just a girl, Your Majesty," she whispered, her eyes wide and feigning a human's terror. "Please. I don't know what you've done to me. I have a shift at the library in 4 hours. I have rent to pay." Kaelin's eyes narrowed, the crimson swirling with a dangerous skepticism. He reached out, his cold fingers tracing the edge of the glowing mark. "A human girl does not have a heart that beats like a war drum when a king approaches. A human girl does not smell of ozone and ancient silver." He stepped closer, his presence a physical pressure that forced her back against a row of washing machines. Behind him, 2 of his elite guard, Silas Thorne and Lucian Vane, stepped into the doorway. Silas was a wall of muscle and scarred leather, his eyes scanning the room with a hunter's precision. Lucian, the king's younger brother, leaned against the frame with a bored, lethal elegance, his gaze lingering on Elena with a predatory curiosity. "The girl is plain, Kaelin," Lucian drawled, his voice a sharp contrast to the king's gravity. "A little mouse in a gray hoodie. Are you sure the bond hasn't finally snapped your senses? Why would the king of the night choose a mortal who smells of laundry detergent?" "Because she isn't a mortal," Kaelin hissed, never taking his eyes off Elena. "She is a riddle wrapped in a lie. And I have spent 300 years waiting for a riddle I couldn't solve." Elena felt the stake in her heart, the metaphorical one. She saw the way Silas moved toward her, his hand on the hilt of a black steel blade. These were the men who had hunted her people to the brink of extinction. These were the monsters she was born to execute. And now their king had claimed her as his soulmate. Her motivation shifted from hiding to surviving. She couldn't let them take her to the spire. If the high priests of the vampires tasted her blood, they would know immediately what she was. They would see the silver in her marrow and the moon in her eyes. "I won't go with you," Elena said, her voice gaining a sudden sharp edge that made Silas pause. "You have no choice," Kaelin replied, his hand sliding into her hair, forcing her to look up at him. "The mark is a tether. You feel it, don't you? The pull in your chest? The way your skin screams for my touch even as your mind fears it." He was right. The bond was a biological betrayal. It was forcing her cells to recognize him as her anchor. As she looked into his ancient, lonely eyes, she saw a flicker of something she didn't expect. A profound, aching vulnerability. The king wasn't just looking for a mate. He was looking for an end to a centuries-long isolation. But as he leaned down to pull her into the shadows of his cloak, a low, guttural howl echoed from the alleyway outside. It wasn't a dog and it wasn't a vampire. It was a call that made Elena's soul shiver. The hunt had begun. And the vampire king wasn't the only one who had found her. The king has marked his greatest enemy, and his own brother thinks he's crazy. This is getting so intense. Do you think Elena can keep her secret while being tied to the man who is supposed to kill her? Tell me your theories in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed, do it now. The inciting incident is about to change the world. The howl that ripped through the rain-slicked alley wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration that shattered the remaining glass in the laundromat's windows. Elena felt her blood turn to liquid silver. That cry belonged to a grim stalker, a beast of the void bred specifically to sniff out the last of the lunar sentinels. The masquerade was failing. The universe was refusing to let her stay a ghost. "Get back!" Kaelin roared, his regal composure snapping into a combat stance. He didn't look at the door. He stepped in front of Elena, his massive frame shielding her. "Silas, form the perimeter." The 2 guards moved with blurring speed, their black steel blades singing as they unsheathed them. But the shadows in the doorway didn't just move, they bled. 3 hulking forms, draped in tattered gray fur and smelling of rotted earth, lunged from the darkness. Their eyes were glowing pits of sulfur, and their claws were tipped with the one substance that could kill a king: obsidian ash. "Grim stalkers," Lucian hissed, his bored elegance replaced by a sharp, panicked focus. "They haven't been seen since the Great Purge. Why are they in a human city? They aren't here for the city, Kalen growled, his fangs extending as a dark miasmic aura began to radiate from his skin. They're here for her. Elena watched in horror as the lead beast bypassed Silas entirely, taking a heavy blow to its shoulder just to get a clear line at her. Phew. The void recognized its prey. If it touched her, the silver in her blood would flare, lighting up the night like a beacon. Every vampire in a 100-mile radius would see her for what she was. Kalen intercepted the beast midair. The collision sounded like two tectonic plates grinding together. He slammed the creature into a row of industrial dryers, his hands wreathed in shadows that began to dissolve the beast's flesh. But the other two stalkers were closing in on Elena from the flanks. "Elena, run!" Kalen shouted, his voice strained as he fought to pin the lead monster down. She had two choices: stay a human and die, or reveal her strength and start a war. The nearest stalker lunged, its sulphurous breath hot against her face. Its claws reached for her throat, the throat Kalen had just marked. Instinct, buried under 10 years of denial, surged to the surface. Elena's hand moved faster than a human eye could track. She caught the beast's wrist, her fingers sinking into its fur with a strength that cracked bone. A low, humming light began to emanate from her skin, a pale lunar glow that made the vampires hiss in sudden, instinctive pain. What are you?" Silas gasped, dropping his guard for a fatal second as he stared at the human girl who was currently bench-pressing a 300-pound shadow beast. Elena didn't answer. She twisted the stalker's arm and kicked it square in the chest, the impact sending it flying through the back wall of the laundromat. But the flare of her power acted like a flare in the night. Kalen turned, his eyes wide with a devastating realization. He saw the silver glow. He felt the sudden metallic tang in the air that signaled the presence of a sentinel. The mate bond between them didn't just pulse, it screamed. It was a bridge connecting the king of the night to his natural-born executioner. "You," Kalen whispered, the lead beast finally dissolving into ash beneath his hands. The remaining stalker whimpered and retreated into the rain, its mission accomplished. It had forced her to show her hand. Elena stood in the center of the wreckage, her gray hoodie torn, her skin slowly fading back to its dull human appearance. But the damage was done. Silas and Lucian had their swords leveled at her heart, their expressions twisted in a mix of fear and hatred. "A sentinel," Lucian spat, his voice trembling. "Kalen, you've marked a sentinel. You've tied the spire to a monster that was built to destroy us." Kalen didn't move. He stood amidst the ruins, the rain pouring in through the shattered roof, soaking his royal silks. He looked at Elena, not as a mate and not as a riddle, but as the greatest threat his kingdom had ever faced. "Is it true?" Kalen asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that promised no mercy. "Have you been living among my people, waiting for the moment to strike?" Elena looked at the mark on her neck, the violet glow now pulsing with an aggressive silver light. "I wasn't waiting for anything, Kalen," she said, her voice finally steady, finally her own. "I was just trying to survive you." The inciting incident had shattered her life, but it had also ended the lie. The king had found his mate, but he had also found his greatest enemy. And as the sirens of the city began to wail in the distance, Elena knew her 10 years of peace were over. The secret is out. Elena just showed her true power, and now the king's guards want her head on a silver platter. "I'm literally shaking. Can a mate bond survive a century of blood feud? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you're as obsessed as I am, make sure you've subscribed. The rising tension is going to be legendary." The sirens of the city police were a distant tinny wail compared to the heavy, localized silence inside the wreckage of the laundromat. Silas and Lucian moved in a synchronized, lethal arc, their black steel blades humming as they boxed Elena in. The air smelled of ozone and the metallic tang of her exposed blood, a scent that acted like a physical blow to the vampire's senses. "Kalen, step away from it," Lucian hissed, his eyes tracking the silver luminescence still swirling beneath Elena's skin. "That isn't a woman. It's a biological weapon. Every second you leave that mark on her neck, you are feeding her your strength." Kalen didn't move. He stood like a statue of obsidian, his gaze anchored to Elena's face. The betrayal in his eyes was a jagged thing, but beneath it, the mate bond pulsed with a confused, frantic energy. It didn't care about ancient wars. It only cared that its other half was in danger. Is that why you stayed in Oakhaven? Kaelin's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. To wait for a king to stumble into your path so you could hollow him out from the inside? I didn't even know you were in this hemisphere, Kaelin. Elena snapped, her hands curling into fists, her fingernails glowing with a faint, pearlescent light. I've spent 10 years breathing human smog and eating human food just to forget that people like you exist. I didn't ask for this, Mark. I didn't ask for you. The Grim Stalkers found you, Silas countered, his blade inching toward her throat. The void doesn't hunt nothing. It hunts threats. If the Shadow Realm thinks you're worth 3 stalkers, then the Spire thinks you're worth an execution. Lower your steel, Kaelin commanded. Brother, you can't be serious, Lucian began. Lower it. Kaelin's voice exploded with the authority of the throne, a physical wave of power that forced his guards to sheath their weapons, their faces twisting in reluctant obedience. Kaelin stepped toward Elena. The pull between them was a physical cord now, dragging her toward him even as her instincts screamed to bolt. He reached out, his hand wrapping firmly around her arm. His skin was ice, but where he touched her, the silver fire in her veins went quiet, replaced by a strange humming peace. You are coming to the Spire, he stated. It wasn't a request. Not as a queen. Not yet. You are coming as a high-value prisoner of the crown. If you try to run, my guards will not be the ones to stop you. I will. You're taking a sentinel into the heart of your kingdom? Elena whispered, horror dawning on her. If your people find out, they'll riot. They'll kill us both. Then we had better make sure they don't find out, Kaelin said, his eyes flashing crimson. He stripped off his heavy midnight coat and threw it over her shoulders, the scent of clove and earth enveloping her, masking the silver tang of her aura. The journey to the Eastern Spire was a blur of high-speed black sedans and hidden mountain passes. As the fortress city loomed out of the mist, a jagged needle of Gothic stone and violet light, the tension reached a fever pitch. Elena was surrounded by thousands of her natural enemies. Every vampire she passed sniffed the air, their predatory instincts triggered by the human girl the king was escorting with such grim intensity. Inside the royal wing, Kaelin shoved her into a lavish chamber draped in velvet and iron. He locked the door and turned to her, the shadows in the room seemingly crawling up the walls to meet his fury. Explain, he demanded. Every year. Every lie. Before the High Council wakes up and smells the silver on my hands. Elena stood her ground, the oversized coat slipping off one shoulder to reveal the glowing violet mark. My coven was slaughtered when I was 14, Kaelin. I was the only one who made it to the neutral zones. I took a vow of silence, not of words but of power. I haven't used my strength in a decade. I just wanted to be normal. There is nothing normal about being the soulmate of a king you were born to kill, Kaelin growled, stepping into her space. He grabbed her waist, pulling her flush against him. The bond flared, a violent collision of silver and shadow that made the stone floor beneath them crack. I can feel your hatred, Elena. But I can also feel your hunger. Your blood wants me just as much as it wants to stop my heart. He leaned down, his fangs grazing the mark once more, not to claim but to test. Elena gasped, her hands clutching his leather vest, her head falling back. The tension wasn't just political, it was a biological war. But as their lips were inches apart, a frantic pounding erupted on the heavy oak door. Kaelin. Lucian's voice was panicked. The High Council has invoked the right of purity. They heard about the laundromat. They're demanding to see the girl's blood. If she doesn't bleed red in front of the elders within the hour, they'll declare you a traitor to the bloodline. The walls weren't just closing in, they were starting to crumble. The right of purity. If Elena bleeds, her silver blood will reveal the truth and start a massacre. I am on the edge of my seat. Can Kaelin find a way to fake her humanity, or is this the moment the war begins? Tell me your ideas in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. The midpoint revelation is going to change everything. The pounding on the oak door was the drumbeat of an approaching execution. Inside the royal chamber, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and the sharp metallic tang of Elena's mounting panic. They have the sanguine chalice, Kaelin, Elena whispered, her hands trembling against his chest. If even one drop of my blood touches that silver basin, it won't just turn red. It will boil. It will scream. Your council will know they're looking at a sentinel before the first drop even settles. Kaelin's grip on her waist tightened, his knuckles white. The Ice King was gone, replaced by a man looking into the abyss. The right of purity is ancient law. I cannot stop the elders from demanding the blood price. If I refuse, they will invoke the Kingslayer clause. They will strip my crown and hunt us both through these halls. He turned away, pacing the length of the room like a caged beast. His shadows lashed out, snuffing the candles until only the violet glow of the mark remained. There must be a way to mask it. A glamour, a tether. There is no glamour strong enough to hide sentinel blood from a vampire high priest, Elena said, stepping into the center of the room. The silver light beneath her skin was pulsing now, reacting to the proximity of so many predators. But there is something else. Something my mother told me before the purge. Kaelin stopped. Tell me. A sentinel's blood is only silver because it is unclaimed, she said, her voice dropping to a haunting whisper. We are the moon's hunters. But if a sentinel truly willingly binds themselves to a king of the night, if the bond is sealed not just by a mark, but by an eclipse vow, the blood changes. It mirrors the master. It turns a deep royal crimson. Kaelin's eyes flared a brilliant, terrifying red. The eclipse vow is a myth, Elena. It's a total surrender of your power. You would be giving me your life, your strength, everything that makes you a sentinel. You would effectively become my thrall. I would become your mate, she corrected, stepping closer until her chest brushed his. The bond is already there, Kaelin. I can feel your heart beating in my own ribs. I can feel your loneliness. You aren't just a king to me anymore. You're the only person who has actually seen me in a decade. The revelation was a double-edged sword. To save her life and prevent a war, Elena would have to sacrifice the very nature of what she was. She would have to stop being a hunter and start being a queen. But the danger wasn't just the loss of power, it was the truth of the vow itself. There is a catch, Elena added, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. The vow only works if it's based on a soul truth. If you take my blood and the vow is a lie, if you don't actually intend to protect me or if I don't actually trust you, the chalice will explode. It will kill everyone in the room. The door groaned as Lucian's voice grew more desperate. Kaelin, they are entering the Great Hall. You have 5 minutes. Kaelin grabbed Elena's face, his thumbs wiping away a stray tear. The choice was a collision of centuries of hatred and a single night of destiny. I have spent 300 years ruling a kingdom of shadows, Elena. I never thought I'd find a light worth keeping. If this vow is the only way to keep you, then I will take every drop you give me. He leaned down, his fangs lengthening. But he didn't go for her neck. He took her hand, his eyes locked on hers, and sliced a thin line across her palm with a sharp, obsidian fingernail. Elena gasped as the silver blood began to well up, bright, shimmering and lethal. But as Kaelin pressed his own cut palm against hers, the room exploded in a silent violet shockwave. The silver didn't just mix with his dark ancient blood. It began to swirl, to darken, to transform. The midpoint revelation wasn't just about their survival. It was the realization that the enemies were gone. They were a new species entirely. But as the blood began to turn a deep, haunting crimson, the doors were thrown open. The high priest stood there, their white robes stained with the dust of centuries, the sanguine chalice glowing with a hungry red light. The king and his human, the lead elder hissed, his eyes milky with age and malice. Step forward. Let us see if the king has brought a bride to the spire or a plague. The eclipse vow. Elena is giving up her power to save their lives. But will the blood change in time? And what happens if the elders sense the silver lingering in the air? This is the ultimate gamble. Drop a VOW in the comments if you think they can pull it off. And make sure you've subscribed. The darkest hour is coming and it's going to be brutal. The Great Hall of the Spire was a cathedral of bone and jagged obsidian, illuminated by the flickering unnatural violet of the soul flames. Hundreds of vampires stood in the tiered galleries, their eyes fixed on the small hooded figure standing beside their king. The air was thick with the scent of ancient dust and a predatory hunger that made Elena's skin crawl. Kaelin Valerius, the lead elder, Morthos intoned, his voice like dry parchment tearing. He held the sanguine chalice aloft. The silver basin began to hum, sensing the proximity of the royal line. You bring a mortal into the sanctum. You claim a bond that has not been seen in a millennium. Prove she is of the red, or watch her ashen remains scatter in the wind. Kaelin's hand was a vice around Elena's. He could feel the silver fire in her veins fighting the dark, heavy pull of his own blood. The eclipse vow was working, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a silk thread. She is my mate, Kaelin declared, his voice echoing with a hollow, desperate power. Her blood is my blood. Elena stepped forward, her hood falling back to reveal her pale, determined face. The mark on her neck was throbbing, a deep, bruised purple. She reached out, her hand hovering over the cold rim of the chalice. Trust him, her mind whispered. Give up the moon to save the shadow. She sliced her palm once more. The room held its breath. A single heavy drop fell. It hit the silver basin with a sound like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, the liquid shimmered with a terrifying, pearlescent light, the silver of a sentinel. Morthos's eyes widened, his fangs baring in a snarl of heresy. But then the king's blood, pulsing through the vow, surged. The drop turned a deep, obsidian crimson. It didn't boil. It didn't scream. It settled into the chalice as dark and rich as a vintage wine. The silence that followed was deafening. Morthos stared at the blood, his brow furrowed in confusion and suspicion. It is red, he whispered, his voice laced with venomous disappointment. The king has found a mortal heart. But the darkest hour wasn't a failure of the blood. It was a failure of the soul. As Kaelin led Elena away from the altar, triumphant but drained, a shadow detached itself from the gallery. Lucian, Kaelin's own brother, stepped into the light. He wasn't looking at the chalice. He was holding a jagged, glowing shard of lunar stone, an artifact stolen from the Sentinel ruins. The blood may lie, Morthos, Lucian shouted, his voice cracking with a manic, jealous fervor. But the stone does not. If she is human, this shard will remain dark. But if she is the monster I suspect, it will sing. Before Kaelin could react, Lucian hurled the stone. It didn't hit Elena, it shattered at her feet. The reaction was instantaneous. The lunar stone didn't just glow, it erupted. A pillar of pure, silver moonlight blasted upward, engulfing Elena. The eclipse vow, built on the fragile foundation of her suppressed nature, shattered under the weight of the ancient artifact. Elena screamed as her human glamour was ripped away. Her eyes turned a blinding, liquid silver. Her skin began to radiate a heat so intense it scorched the velvet of her cloak. The silver blood in her veins, no longer masked, began to steam, the scent of ozone and holy fire filling the great hall. Sentinel! Morthos shrieked, falling back in terror. A sentinel in the spire. Treason. Regicide. The hall exploded into chaos. The galleries emptied as hundreds of vampires lunged toward the center, their fangs bared, their eyes glowing with a frenzied ancient hatred. Kaelin was tackled by his own elite guard, pinned down by the very men who had sworn to protect him. Elena, run! Kaelin roared, his shadows lashing out, but even a king couldn't fight a kingdom. Elena stood alone in the center of the storm, her power fully returned but her heart breaking. She looked at Kaelin, seeing the blood on his face and the despair in his eyes. He had tried to be a human. He had tried to be a mate. But the world wanted her to be a weapon. You brought a plague into our house, Kaelin. Lucian yelled, his blade leveled at his brother's throat. Now watch as we cleanse it. The darkest hour had arrived. The secret was dead, the king was in chains, and the woman who wanted peace was forced to become the very executioner she had spent 10 years trying to forget. The secret is blown. Lucian has betrayed his own brother, and now the entire vampire spire is closing in on Elena. I am hyperventilating. How can she save Kaelin without killing his entire people? This is the ultimate conflict. Drop a fight in the comments if you want to see Elena unleash her full sentinel power. And don't forget to subscribe. The turning point is coming. The silver pillar of light didn't just expose Elena. It acted as a clarion call to every ancient instinct she had suppressed for a decade. As the first wave of high-ranking vampires lunged from the galleries, their fingers hooked like talons, Elena didn't cower. She didn't stay the human girl in the oversized hoodie. She breathed in, and the air in the great hall turned to frost. With a roar that shook the obsidian foundations, Elena unleashed a shockwave of lunar energy. It wasn't a strike to kill, it was a pulse of pure starlight static. The vampires were thrown back, their sensitive nervous systems overloaded by the celestial frequency. Enough. Elena's voice wasn't her own. It was layered with the echoes of 1,000 sentinels who had come before her. She turned to Kalen, who was being pinned by Silas and a dozen guards. His eyes were wide, a mixture of terror for her and an undeniable primal awe. He saw the woman he had marked, now wreathed in a shimmering ethereal armor of light. "You want a monster?" Elena shouted, her gaze sweeping the room, landing finally on Lucian, who was cowering behind the lead elder. "I have spent 10 years being nothing, so you wouldn't have to fear that everything I am. I chose peace. I chose him." "She's bewitched the king." Morthos screamed, clutching his scorched robes. "Kill her. Burn the mark from his flesh." But the turning point wasn't just Elena's power, it was the bond. As the guards moved to execute the Kingslayer clause, Kalen's shadows didn't just lash out, they merged with Elena's silver light. Where the two energies met, a new violet-black flame erupted. It was the eclipse in physical form. The mark on Elena's neck flared so brightly it blinded the front row of attackers. Kalen threw off his captors with a strength that had doubled. He stood, his hand reaching out across the hall. Elena didn't hesitate. She leaped, her movements a blur of lunar grace, and caught his hand. The moment their skin touched, the great hall went silent. The clashing energies stabilized into a terrifying, beautiful equilibrium. "You speak of purity," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register that vibrated in every vampire's chest. "But you do not recognize the divine. The sentinels were not our enemies by nature. They were our balance. And I have found the scales." He looked at Lucian, his eyes no longer just crimson but flecked with Elena's silver. "Brother, you sought to start a war to steal a crown. But you have only succeeded in crowning a queen who can unmake you with a thought." Lucian trembled, the lunar stone shards at his feet turning to black ash. He realized too late that the bond wasn't a weakness to be exploited. It was a fusion of two apex powers that the spire could never hope to contain. "We are leaving," Kalen announced, his arm wrapping around Elena's waist. He wasn't retreating, he was choosing a new kingdom. "And if any of you follow, you will not find a girl in a laundromat. You will find the eclipse." The turning point was the realization that they didn't need the spire's approval. They were the new law. But as they backed toward the great gates, the lead elder reached for a hidden lever on the altar. "If we cannot have a king," Morthos hissed, his face twisting in a final suicidal spite, "then the spire shall have no one." The floor beneath them began to groan. The ancient self-destruct mechanism, the sunstone core, had been triggered. "The spire is collapsing. Morthos has triggered the sunstone, and it's going to vaporize everything in the mountain." I'm screaming. Can Elena and Kalen escape the explosion, or will their new union end in ashes? Tell me what you think in the comments. And hit that subscribe button. The climactic resolution is next. The mountain groaned, a sound like a dying god, as the sunstone core, a massive trapped shard of solar energy, began to destabilize. Golden light, lethal to every vampire in the spire, started to bleed through the cracks in the obsidian floor. The galleries erupted into a blind, screaming panic as the immortal aristocracy realized their sanctuary had become their funeral pyre. "Morthos, you fool!" Kalen roared, his shadows stretching to catch a falling pillar. "You'll kill thousands just to spite a bond you don't understand. Better a dead kingdom than a tainted one," the lead elder shrieked, his skin already beginning to blister under the rising solar heat. Elena felt the silver in her blood flare in response to the sunstone. As a lunar sentinel, she was built to channel celestial energy, but this was raw, unfiltered starfire. It was enough to vaporize her along with the rest of the spire. "Kalen, the core," Elena shouted, her hair whipping around her face in a halo of white light. "If it breaks the surface, the entire mountain will collapse on the city below. Thousands of humans, my neighbors, they'll be gone. I can't suppress solar energy, Elena." Kalen gritted his teeth, his dark aura flickering as the light ate away at his power. "My shadows are being burned alive." "Then don't suppress it," Elena said, her eyes turning a solid, glowing pearl. "Channel it through me. The eclipse vow, use it as a bridge." The resolution was a suicide mission of the soul. Kalen grabbed her hands, his fingers interlocking with hers. He didn't pull her away from the heat, he dove into it with her. The violet-black energy of the king and the blinding silver of the sentinel collided directly over the pulsing sunstone. Yow! Elena screamed. She became a lightning rod. The solar fire poured into her, but instead of incinerating her, it hit the bridge of the mate bond. Kalen took half the weight, his ancient endurance acting as a heat sink for the cosmic energy. Together they formed a perfect circle, a dark sun that absorbed the explosion. The shockwave was silent. A dome of violet-silver light expanded through the great hull, neutralizing the sunstone's radiation. It didn't destroy, it transmuted. The jagged obsidian of the spire began to glow, turning into a translucent reinforced quartz that hummed with a new stable frequency. As the light faded, the great hall was transformed. The oppressive Gothic darkness was gone, replaced by a cathedral of shimmering crystal that held the soft glow of a permanent twilight. Morthos fell to his knees, his eyes wide as he touched the new warm stone. The purity he had obsessed over had been replaced by something stronger. Harmony. Kalen and Elena collapsed onto the dais, their clothes scorched, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The mark on Elena's neck was no longer a bruise. It was a permanent, glowing sigil of a silver crescent entwined with a black sun. "You saved them," Kalen whispered, his hand trembling as he brushed a stray silver-white lock of hair from her face. "You saved the people who wanted you dead." "I saved my home," Elena replied, a tired but triumphant smile touching her lips. "And I saved my king." Lucian, stripped of his weapons and his pride, was dragged forward by Silas. The guard who had watched the monster save his species looked at Elena with a new, profound respect. He didn't level his sword at her heart. He knelt. One by one the survivors in the gallery, the highborn, the soldiers, the servants, followed suit. They weren't kneeling to a vampire king. They were kneeling to the eclipse. The war that had been brewing for a century didn't end in a massacre. It ended in a miracle. The sentinel who had pretended to be human for a decade had finally stopped running, and in doing so she had redefined what it meant to be a queen. They saved the spire. Elena used the sunstone to transform the entire kingdom. "I am literally crying tears of joy. The Ice King and the Lunar Sentinel have created a new world. Do you think the other vampire kingdoms will accept this new queen? Tell me in the comments. And don't go anywhere, the satisfying conclusion is next." The city of Oakhaven still hummed with the same electric energy, the same rain-slicked streets and the same neon-lit laundromats. But high above the mist, where the mountains touched the stars, the eastern spire no longer stood as a jagged needle of fear. It was a beacon of iridescent quartz, glowing with a soft twilight violet that could be seen for 100 miles. Inside the royal conservatory, Elena sat on a stone bench, her fingers tracing the delicate silver veins of a lunar orchid, a flower that hadn't bloomed in a century. She wasn't wearing an oversized hoodie anymore. She wore a gown of starlight silk that shimmered with every breath she took. The violet mark on her neck was a permanent part of her, a beautiful swirling sigil that pulsed in sync with the heartbeat of the man standing behind her. "The archivists are calling this the era of the eclipse," Kalen murmured, his hands settling on her shoulders. His touch no longer felt like ice. It felt like home. "They say the city below has never been safer. The grim stalkers have retreated to the void, unable to face the light you've brought to the mountain." "I'm just glad I don't have to hide in a laundromat anymore," Elena joked, leaning her head back against his chest. "Though I do miss the smell of that specific detergent." Kalen chuckled, a low, warm sound that vibrated through her. "I've bought the building. It's now a protected landmark. Though I suspect the patrons are confused as to why the King of the Night owns a dry-cleaning business." The transition hadn't been easy. There were still those who whispered in the dark, and other vampire kingdoms watched the spire with a mixture of envy and terror. But with a lunar sentinel as their queen and a vampire king as her anchor, the balance was unbreakable. Silas had become the commander of the new hybrid guard, and even Lucian, stripped of his titles, had begun the long, humble road to redemption, serving as an emissary to the human world he once despised. "Are you happy, Elena?" Kalen asked, his voice dropping to a low, intimate frequency. "After 10 years of pretending to be something you weren't, is this enough?" Elena turned in his arms, her liquid silver eyes searching his crimson ones. She saw the centuries of loneliness that she had filled, and the future they were building together. a bridge between two species that had been meant to destroy one another. I spent a decade being a human because I was afraid of my own power, she said softly. But with you, I don't have to be a human and I don't have to be a weapon. I just get to be me. Kalen leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that tasted of clove honey, and a peace that had been won through fire. Outside, the moon rose, full, bright and silver, but for the first time in history it didn't signal a hunt. It signaled a homecoming. The girl who wore the simple hoodie was gone. The king who ruled with ice had melted. And in the heart of the spire the eclipse burned on, a reminder that even the deepest shadows can be transformed by a single brave light. And that is our story. Elena and Kalen didn't just survive the bond, they used it to rewrite the laws of the supernatural world. I am so incredibly moved by their journey from enemies to the ultimate power couple. What did you think of the eclipse vow? Would you have sacrificed your power to save the person you loved? Let me know in the comments below. If you loved this supernatural 40-minute journey, please give this video a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep bringing these epic narratives to life. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next story.